Welcome to the Future Orientations, a Canada-Finland Symposium for emerging scholars in Caribbean Studies research. It is customary in Canada to mark the start of our gatherings with a land acknowledgement. Given our diverse locations spanning Canada, Finland, and the Caribbean, instead of reading a specific land acknowledgement, I invite you all to acknowledge the lands on which you live and work. In doing so, I entreat you to reflect on our broken relationships and covenants with Indigenous peoples and on the historic and ongoing processes of colonialism, extractivism, and dispossession. As scholars and creatives studying the Caribbean, what might the region's history of resistance and inventiveness, of survival and of deep and abiding livity teach the world about liberation and everyday living? What possibilities are held by a praxis of repair and reparations with not only each other, but with the land, the sea, and non-human life? For those of us in Canada and Finland, we invite you to learn more about the treaties and covenants to which the respective states are beholden. I encourage all of us to learn more about Indigenous peoples across the Caribbean and their social and political struggles. And finally, as you acknowledge the lands on which you live, work, and study, to ask yourself, what does this compel me to do?
The primary focus of the Future Orientation Symposium is to compare thematic concentrations, analyze institutional support structures, and map disciplinary connections across Canada and Finland. We have two roundtables. The first features faculty at York University and the University of Helsinki. The second roundtable features emerging scholars, current graduate students studying the Caribbean based in Canada and Finland.
The symposium has three primary objectives: to establish scholarly and professional connections between graduate students specializing in Caribbean studies across Canadian and Finnish universities, to critically explore the current status and institutional footprint of Caribbean studies within Canadian and Finnish universities, and to facilitate dialogue and thematic focuses, methodologies, and new areas of exploration in Caribbean studies.
The footprint of the Caribbean in Finland is small, but the persistent steps and strides of people in this country refute the claim that neither a Caribbean studies field nor Caribbean diaspora exist. Cultural showcases of food and Independence Day celebrations, alongside the underground dub, reggae, and dancehall parties that form the sound system culture in Helsinki, the bashment yards of the city, are the bold space-making practices of Finnish and Caribbean people here. This presence is further cemented through Caribbean literature. Translated texts of major works such as V.S. Naipaul's Miguel Street in Finnish. It sits alongside English language works in the National Library system, including Wilson Harris's The Guyana Quartet and contemporary texts like Lisa Allen Agostini's The Bread, the Devil Ned. Conversely, there are wider historical connections, such as the industrial city, Tampere, referred to as the Manchester of the North, and its trade connections and linkages to the colonial Caribbean.
The Caribbean presence in Canada dates back to 1796, when approximately 600 Jamaican Maroons were forcibly exiled by the British from Trelawney Town, Jamaica, to Halifax, Nova Scotia. The Jamaican Maroons contributed to Nova Scotian life, and their presence left a legacy of resistance and resilience that echoed in the 1969 Sir George Williams affair. Considered the largest student mobilization in Canadian history, it was led by Caribbean students protesting anti-Black racism at what is now Concordia University, and for many Canadian scholars is considered a key moment in the rebirth of Black activism in Montreal. These moments of Caribbean activism, along with the transborder intellectual networks of the New World Group and the 1968 Congress of Black Writers, as well as the growing Caribbean diaspora, are the foundations of Caribbean studies in Canadian academic institutions. York University, where I am based, established the Center for Research on Latin America and the Caribbean in 1978, now Canada's oldest research center dedicated to the region. Rooted in the 1972 Latin American and Caribbean Studies program and the 1970s influx of Latin American exile, it acts as a hub for academic, community, and transnational research. The University of Toronto established a Caribbean Studies degree program in 1995. And in 2020, Brock University and the University of the West Indies partnered to form the Canada-Caribbean Institute. These are some examples of the institutional structures for Caribbean studies in Canada. Yet, as St. Lucian Canadian political theorist Chev Eugene notes, there is a tragedy of Caribbean studies in Canada. The recent academic institutional response to the political and social anti-Black climate of recent years has led to the reemergence of Black Canadian studies and an apparent subsequent marginalization of Caribbean studies. And the neoliberal ethos of the academy continues to constrain the field and its institutional structures as it competes for scarce students and even scarcer program funding.
Let's take a hard look. The field of Caribbean studies is as dynamic and complex as Caribbean society itself. Our field is generative. It contributes to decolonial and postcolonial thought, critical discourse on race and ethnicity, and the policy and practice related to social cohesion of multi-ethnic societies. It highlights the potential for articulating new worlds of emancipation through the creative imagination of people from so-called small places. This symposium builds on the work of others and affirms our belief in the validity and value of Caribbean thought, culture, and civilization. In the words of Barbadian philosopher George Lamin, we hold no stronger conviction than that the Caribbean is our own experiment in a unique equation of human civilization. Welcome to Future Orientations.